This happened to me not even 2 hours ago, and I'm still jumpy from it. I apologize in advance for errors. This will be my first post on Reddit. I've been a long-time reader, and I listened to a shit ton of creepy Let's Not Meet on YouTube before, and I never really thought it would ever happen to me. I was wrong. I'm a 19-year-old female, about 165 pounds, and I'm also 5'9". I live with my grandmother, and we really don't get along, but I don't have any other options for the moment, so I manage. I usually have to take out the garbage when she tells me to, and I really hate doing it. This week, we had a lot to take out, because my grandmother was getting a new bed, and her room had a lot of shit in it that needed to be cleaned out to make room. I was getting her old computer stand that she calls the monstrosity, and I had to clean the shit out of my room as well to make it fit. This is why we had a lot of shit to get rid of this week, and I was the one to have to make it all fit in one small ass bin. It was about 10 p.m., and this wasn't even the latest I've taken out the trash. I had taken out at 3 a.m. before, just because my grandmother was on the phone with another one of her stupid daughters that was getting the bed. I had already taken the trash out, and I had to fix that damn recycling bin. I was just way too small, so I had to flatten the boxes to make everything fit without falling out. I was in the garage, and the garage doors were open. I live in a quiet little nest of townhomes, and we don't own a car, so the garage is the storage for everything that isn't being used. Now, I listen to creepy stories on YouTube, and I was listening to one before I started taking out the trash. This already made me a bit jumpy being outside in the cold and quiet dark in the month of October alone. I know people do crazy shit to scare people for kicks, but it never happened to me before, so me looking up every so often to the door wasn't really out of the question for me. Of course, I knew I was overreacting, but I still felt uneasy, like I knew something wasn't right. I was fiddling with the recycling for about 5 minutes at this point when I glanced up at the door. To my complete horror, I saw a clown standing in the middle of the sidewalk of my driveway, staring right at me. All the blood from my face drained. I couldn't help but feel it. You always hear about these things, but never think it'll be you. Be thankful you don't know what it feels like. The clown was straight out of a horror movie. Smudgy makeup, red nose and hair, black and white striped clown outfit with rainbow spots. I was frozen in fear. I never felt fear before in my life, and this isn't something I ever want to feel again. I shot up when it took a step forward. I was staring at them, scared shitless, and prayed my grandmother wouldn't come back to the door. I don't care for my grandmother, but I don't want her hurt. We don't get along, but I still care for her, if you know what I mean. It may sound cold, but whatever. The damn clown took another step forward. It was at this point I noticed it. How had I missed something so important? The clown had a butcher knife. At this point, the clown was about 5 footsteps from the garage door. I knew if I stayed put any longer, I was probably going to die. I really don't know how I did this, and it's really a blur because of the adrenaline that was running through me. All I remember was that fucker grinning and showing his piss-yellow teeth running towards me. Somehow, I managed to jump backwards inside the thankfully open door and close it using all of my weight to force it shut. Thank God I always make sure the door leading to the garage is locked 24/7 because I'm always afraid of someone breaking in. The clown was banging on the metal door and trying to break it down. At this point, my grandmother came to see what the hell was going on, and I told her to call the cops. She went to grab the phone, as I was still holding myself against the door. I had my shoes on, and I had a strong grip on the floor. This fucker wasn't getting in. The banging got more frantic as the guy was backing up, then banging into the door with his whole body. I placed both my feet on the other door leading to the kitchen. My house has the kitchen and laundry room together, and the laundry room leads to the garage. It's no more than 2 regular doors big, and I'm 5'9", so this was good in my case to hold my upper back against the door with my feet up like this. The banging went on forever, or so it felt like. I heard the cop cars as they were probably coming down my street. One last bang that broke the lock on the door and made the door open an inch before I shoved it closed. Nothing else for about 30 seconds. I heard the cop cars, and I knew they were right outside my house, and no more than seconds later, I heard cops saying, "Open up, this is the police's!" I put my feet down, still ready to slam the door closed in case that this was the damn clown. I know this was stupid because I heard cars and radio, but hell, I was scared shitless and on edge. Don't tell me you wouldn't be too. I cracked the door open and to see a cop with his gun drawn in his hand. I opened the door all the way, and my knees gave out and I fell on my butt, staring at the knife stabbed in the metal door. The cop could easily see the trash that was kicked around from the guy and my very pale look, and the fact I was visibly shaking. About 5 or 6 cops showed up and took a look around the outside of my house and took statements and removed the knife from the door. They said we'd get a call back in a couple of days. 2 of the cop cars are still driving past my street about every half hour. I was never scared of clowns. I'm still not, but hell, I don't like them and I don't want to see any clowns for a good while. I messaged one of my friends and told her about it. I think she thought I was joking, so I didn't bother telling her about the knife and I just left it how it was. I never really thought this kind of shit would ever happen in real life, and I wouldn't have this kind of thing happen to me ever, but I was wrong. This can happen to anyone. Never think that it can't. This world is full of crazy fuckers that just want to scare the shit out of you or just plain want to kill you for kicks. Always pay attention to things around you. To the fucker dressed as a clown and trying to kill me and scared the living shit out of me tonight, let's never meet again.
This took place after my parents had divorced, but they lived close to each other, so it wasn't all that bad. Anyway, I would frequently forget stuff at my mom's house because of the constant travel between houses, and this was almost a nightly thing. So one night, I was bringing my Xbox and some games to my dad's house, and one thing to note is that this was one of these townhouses, and my dad lived on one side and the neighbor lived on the other. As I get to my dad's house, I had to pass their side first. While I was passing their house, the wife stopped me and asked me to come closer. I thought that since my dad shared houses with her and her husband, that he knew and trusted her, so I went closer. She noticed the Xbox and games in my hand, and straight up said, "Hey, we have a bunch of fun games and little boys your age that will play with you in here. Do you want to come in?" I slowly backed away, not turning my head to her. As I was doing so, I felt a cold, large hand on my right shoulder. My blood ran cold. I didn't dare turn around. I heard from behind me, "She isn't this nice all the time. I suggest you take up her offer." My fight or flight kicked in and I chose flight. His grip wasn't all that good, so I escaped easily and ran inside. I didn't tell my dad, but I did call the police. I couldn't live knowing that there could have been multiple kids in there. A few minutes passed and a police car showed up. 5 minutes later, the 2 officers walked out of the house with 2 people. Apparently they had been luring kids into their house with the promise of games and toys. I still imagine what would have happened if the man's grip was stronger. And thank God I chose to call the police. They had already lured 2 kids in the house, both boys. So, creepy couple who lured kids into their house? Let's never meet again.
Okay, so this happened this summer, and I still can't take my mind off the whole situation. It's by far the most scariest thing that's ever happened to me. First things first, I am a female and I am 20 years old. I live in a small village in England. It's beautiful and I've lived here all my life, so I have many good memories here. In June, I started walking to the neighboring village every day, which took maybe around 25 minutes to walk to. The village is a lot more old-fashioned and has a lot of history. The journey was fun for me because I love the countryside. It's a beautiful place and it interests me quite a lot too. As soon as you left my village, you would be walking on country lanes that followed you to the other village. Usually, I would leave my house at around 11 a.m. and start heading back to my own village roughly around 2 or 3 p.m. I went alone most of the time, apart from the weekends when I would go with close friends. Both my village and this village only consisted of houses, parks, churches, all that sort of stuff. When I went alone, I sat at a beautiful park and would sit on a picnic bench and read a book or sit on my phone for hours. I even bought a phone case that charges my phone just so my phone wouldn't run out of battery. I did this for a month, until mid-July when I went shopping and sat in a pub at the closest city with my friends on a Thursday. This meant that I didn't go to the village at the usual time. I got back quite late, maybe around 9 p.m. I don't know what the fuck was going through my mind, but I decided that I would go to the village tonight due to the fact that I wasn't tired and I was in a good mood. I left my house at 9:30 and started heading there. It was getting quite dark, so when I left my village and entered the country lanes, I got my flashlight on my phone up I was walking for about 5 to 10 minutes before I realized that what I was doing was stupid. Walking the country lanes at this time of night was not a good idea. Stupidly, I continued. It was no longer than 2 minutes later that I noticed a silhouette in the distance. It was standing about 20 yards away next to the sign that told you which directions you can turn. I felt pretty awkward because I didn't want to pass this person at this time of night, especially on my own. I crossed the road to walk on the opposite side, and the person was just standing there, and they were staring at the ground. As I got closer, I could make out what they were wearing. It was a man wearing a black hoodie, tracksuit bottoms, and some muddy trainers. I got closer and closer, and when he finally knew I was there, he looked up and stared at me. For some reason, I stared back, but carried on walking. I shrugged him off and was walking straight for 10 seconds until I heard him walking behind me. I turned around and he had crossed the road to my side. Then I noticed his face. I was terrified and disgusted. He looked like he had been on drugs for most of his life and must have been in his mid-30s. I couldn't turn around now. I was halfway there and knew that for a fact he would follow me home if I did. I didn't know what to do. I still had at least 10 minutes of walking left and was in the middle of nowhere. No people were around, and the closest building was in the village. I had no friends in the area either, so I couldn't go to anybody's house. I started walking faster, but so did he. I was petrified at this point. Things like this don't happen to people like me. Or, that's what I thought. I started to cry a little, and then I heard him say in the most horrifying and evil tone I've ever heard, "You can't escape me, young lady." I started running and screaming. I don't know how to explain it, but I couldn't control my screaming. It was like I was automatically doing it, if that makes sense. He started running too, and he was much faster than me. Could this whole scenario get any worse? I slowed down, extremely out of breath. I cursed my asthma for this. Tears were streaming down my face, and I felt like I was going to collapse. Then this fucking creep grabs me, and I fall to the floor screaming louder than I've ever screamed before. I didn't know how I could possibly have screamed like this, considering I was out of breath and having a panic attack. He was lying on top of me. He was so fucking heavy and smelled so bad that I could have thrown up. I couldn't see his face as well anymore due to the tears in my eyes. I paused for a second, then he whispered into my ear, "I won't hurt you, but I will break your neck if you continue to scream like that." Regardless of what he had just said, I continued for what felt like an eternity. I heard a car heading towards us in the distance. I screamed, "Help me." I felt a lot of relief when I heard the car slowing down. "Help me, please," I continued. The guy got off me and sprinted into a cornfield. A man and a woman stepped out of the car. They must have not been that much older than me, and they asked me what happened. I told them the whole situation, stuttering and gasping for air. The woman sat with me and gave me some water, and luckily she had an inhaler. The man shouted for the creep, who we could all still see sprinting extremely fast down the field. They both took me home, and I thanked them both ever so much for helping me. God knows what could have happened to me if they didn't stop or even notice me. I told my friends about the whole event, and a lot of people met me during the weekend and comforted me. The police were notified, but unfortunately, the creep was never caught. I didn't have a good enough explanation of his face, and of course, there was no CCTV footage in that area. Of course, I never walk the streets, especially country lanes, after dark anymore. I only visit the village every week now since this event, and only ever go with my close friend Courtney. My lesson here is that no matter how safe your area may sound, there will always be bad people around, and you should never walk the streets at this time alone. Creepy, violent, drug-addicted freak, I hope you get caught and get what you deserve. And for the love of God, I hope we never meet again.
So, this story begins in my school cafeteria. My friends and I were joking about a sign out front that read, "No ball playing," and a bunch of other rules. So being the immature 8th graders that we were, we decided to steal it. Since I lived like a half a mile from the school, I was voted to do so. To seem less suspicious, I took a backpack so I wouldn't just be carrying a sign home, and my dog, so I looked like I was just taking him for a walk. It was a nice night, but I had this weird feeling in my chest that you can't describe or recreate. I, at first, assumed it to be anxiety, as I was about to commit theft. But I was a minor, and this would be the best time to do it than any other. When I got to the school, I used my foot to hold my dog's leash. One thing I should mention about my dog, he's a yellow lab and extremely protective over me. Anyways, I had to bend the sign to get it into my backpack. When I did, I booked it off the school property and texted my friends that I did it. Now this is where it gets creepy. I passed a couple with a stroller and my dog went batshit crazy at them. I pulled him back and apologized. I noticed that they didn't have wedding rings. This wouldn't have bothered me, but I swear damn near everyone in this town is either Catholic, Methodist, Lutheran, or Jewish, so this struck me as odd. They asked me if I wanted to look at their baby, and I did, but this kinda creeped me out. I didn't grow up in the South, and neither did my family, but I'm still fairly nice and give people a chance. But in my head I was telling myself to book it, but my dog would instinctively stay and fight. I had a knife in my shoe, Sheffield I think. I don't look at it too much because despite how I act socially, I'm kind of a pacifist. The man approaches me and my dog bites his ankle. I still don't have a clue of their intention, so I apologized again and walked off. Now, I don't have very good hearing as my father frequently took me to gun ranges with rifles, so I guess that's why I didn't notice the couple tailing me, but I did notice that my dog was acting off. It was walking weird and looked back a lot. Whenever I took him for walks, he never turned around or really acted this off. When I was a block away from my house, a police patrol car passed, and the officer looked at me weird. I shrugged it off. Finally, my paranoia took hold of me and I turned around. And what I saw horrified me. The baby was no longer in the stroller, but they were still pushing the stroller. In situations like this, you just think that everything is just a huge coincidence, even if it clearly isn't. So I kept trying to justify it. But when I got to my house, I heard from behind me, "Have a good night," in the most creepiest way you can imagine, as if they had just said, "Hey, we know where you live now." But no sound of them moving away from me. I froze in fear when I noticed the footsteps weren't getting further away, but closer. I booked it inside and locked the door, then I called the police. They came up with nothing, but the baby is what scared me. So, weird couple who possibly abandoned a real baby? Let's never meet again.
Hey y'all, long-time lurker, first-time poster. You know how it is. I'd actually kind of forgotten about this incident until recently when my memory was jogged by seeing a few other stalker-type stories on here. I downplayed it at the time, which seems disturbingly common, and it's only now in hindsight that I realize how skeevy this whole situation actually was. This gets pretty wordy, but bear with me. So this was some years back when I was only 16. For reference, I'm a girl. My family had recently moved cities, so it was a whole new neighborhood, new school, new friends, all that good stuff that comes with a more major move. I had to get used to not being able to walk to school too. I had to take the bus downtown and then walk from there to get to where my school was, which was the first for me, since all my previous schools had been within walking distance. Now, the bus system itself wasn't a problem at all. What became a problem was that apparently someone started watching me at the bus stop. About 3 months or something after the move, I created a Facebook profile for the sake of some competition or other. You know, like this Facebook page for a chance of winning this and that. I had nothing else on this profile at all beyond my name. This was before I was borderline mandatory to be active on Facebook. No picture, no information, hadn't even added any friends. It was a blank save for 1 or 2 like pages. I halfway forgot I even made the profile. But then after a few days, I got an email alert for a message on Facebook. So I went to see what was up. It was from an account that was just as empty as mine, and it simply said, "You're cute." What? I was and still am pretty cute, but nothing out of the ordinary. What puzzled me at the most was obviously how whoever this person was would know that. Because no, I did not recognize the profile name at all, and of course my profile didn't even have a picture. I replied something like, "Haha, thanks, but how would you even know?" I wasn't really seeing a red flag yet. I was a little curious, a little flattered. I was still a bit naive, I suppose. So, I got back. "I've seen you at the bus stop. And that didn't sit quite right with me. Obviously, at the same time, though, I was still telling myself it wasn't really a big deal, and I didn't feel too worried or anything. This was a very nice neighborhood, and I'll mention that I'm from Sweden, which is generally safe. Still, that didn't explain how he'd know my name, which is what I asked him next, how he recognized me. He said he wouldn't tell me unless I added him on MSN, the chat client predominantly used at the time, and talked to him on there. So after a little back and forth, I gave him in and added him on there, primarily because I wanted to know how he had gotten my name at all. It's a common name, and I was feeling a little angsty about that. Part of the reason we moved was to get away from a few people. I felt I had to know how he found me, so in case any other people did. His text language is pretty flirty and all. He threw in lots of winky smileys, but from the way he typed, I got the impression that he was around my age. He had a year in his username that I assumed was his birth year, and if that was true, he'd actually be a year younger than me, so I still didn't feel too worried. But I got pretty uncomfortable when he told me how he'd worked out what my name was. It was from the school yearbook, which doesn't seem that much of a stretch at first. I know, but the thing that in the city that I moved to, what they do is they compile all schools from the same education level in the city in the same book. So we're talking about 15 schools in that book and a few hundred pages of photographs. And he'd gone through all of them just to find my face and name. I had actually checked when he told me this. I wasn't in any obvious places in this book at all. I had no particular spot dedicated to me or any activity I was in. It was just in this group photo of my class, about 25 students, I think, around 2/3 through the book. Plus, if he was really a year younger than me, he himself wouldn't be in that book, or have ready access to it, because he'd be in a different level of education. To any fellow Swedes, I was in my first year of gymnast. At the time, he would have been in high school. This didn't cross my mind at the time, but again, if he was a year younger than me, he'd either have to look through his yearbook first and then move on to a yearbook that wasn't for him, or he's seen me at school too and known to look at the right one for that reason. I didn't really tell him it creeped me out, but he started chatting to me on occasion from then on. Mostly normal stuff, so that was fine, I guess. Always with this flirty tone, though. I replied neutrally, or sometimes played along, trying to get an idea of who he was. He said he was a neighbor, and that's why he'd seen me at the bus stop, but he never told me what he looked like. When I was at the bus stop, no one ever came forward to ask him or signal in any way that they might be. Like I said, I didn't recognize his name, if it was even real. He definitely wasn't from our apartment building, though, and for some reason I didn't quite believe him when he said he was from the neighborhood. So I started to feel pretty uneasy at the bus stop when there were other people there with me, wondering if one of them was him, if he was watching me. But waiting alone at the bus stop didn't really help either, because I started wondering if he was watching me from somewhere else. The stop was situated near a grocery store with a parking lot, so he could have been there. I'm pretty sure he did tell me, "You looked cute today," or something similar at least, once or twice, but I honestly don't remember much of what we talked about anymore when we did chat. I did remember they were never long sessions, though. Only 10 minutes to half an hour or so. And I started not really liking seeing him sign on, but for some reason didn't block him. Probably because I still felt I had to work out who he was, and because, well, I didn't feel threatened by him. Just uncomfortable, you know? Until at some point when he told me, I figured out where you live. Acting if that wasn't creepy at all. That skeeved me out. I asked him where he thought I lived, which was maybe a stupid move, but yeah. He gave me the right number, and the right floor, and the right apartment. And at that point, I was definitely feeling less uncomfortable and more scared. He went on to say that he worked this out because a friend of his had lived in our apartment prior to us, and that the timeline for me appearing and his friend moving out made sense. I didn't believe this at all. In that case, he'd have worked out where I lived a lot sooner, and if he had, why was he telling me this now? To mess with me? But if he hadn't found out the way, then what? He had followed me or something from the bus stop? I don't remember what I told him, though that scared me big time. A day or so after that, he sent me a message that was something like, maybe I'll come over and say hi. And I don't remember the exact wording, but it was actually read very threatening to me. It read differently than the other fairly normal stuff we had talked about before. And if I had such a spike of fear when I got that message, it didn't matter finding out who he was like. I didn't want him to come over at all. I remember looking out my bedroom window and being relieved that there was nobody outside. And I sent him a message back that I don't want him to come over. Ever. He sort of threatened that he would, and then he signed off. I blocked his email in his empty Facebook profile. Then after I had done that, I was left feeling really anxious and frightened, thinking that maybe now he'd come over anyway once he'd realized I'd cut off all his other options, that maybe he was on his way right now. And then what would he do? I didn't really fear rape or murder. It was a little too abstract to me at the time, but I was really scared. For a little while after that, I was scared of the bus stop too. I was scared walking home from it, in particular after school. But nothing happened after I blocked him. It all just kind of ended there, which in hindsight, I consider myself extremely lucky. I was definitely dumb and naive at the time because I didn't mention any of this to my mom or stepdad. And whoever this guy was hadn't been willing to give up on me or lost interest, or whatever happened with him, things could have gotten really, really ugly. I was always waiting at the bus stop myself, and I was often home alone if I had a shorter school day. And he did know my name and where I lived, and I'll say it again, I was only 16. It's possible that it was just some socially stupid kid with a distant crush, not knowing how to handle it, but thinking back on it, it seems like it had to be more than that. Either way, I'm glad I never met him.
My friends and I back in college would not necessarily call ourselves ghost hunters, but we like to go out into the woods at night, find old abandoned houses, graveyards, and the like, which are plentiful when you live in the middle of nowhere. A common place for us to go was a park which is very far into the woods that had an old covered bridge that was supposedly haunted. As an explanation as to why this bridge seems so scary, there is a light at the beginning of the bridge, and the shadows of the trees form what looks like a figure. When you sit in the middle of the bridge, the wind makes the figure look like it is moving towards you. To the unsuspecting visitor, this can be a frightening experience, so we like taking our friends here to freak them out. To set the scene, it was late summer on a Wednesday night, probably around 2 a.m. We were all on summer break and had nothing going on, so we decided to take a couple of people down to the bridge to give them a good scare. This area is not easy to get to. There's lots of steep hills and rocky roads. It's very secluded, so as expected, there were no other cars on the road. We got down to the bridge, as we had so many other times before. It was tough to see the light at the end, but there were definitely plenty of shadows around, so the scare factor was still pretty high. so as you are supposed to, we parked our car in the middle of the covered bridge and turned our lights off, as well as our engine. Immediately, the people we brought with us saw the shadow figure approaching our car. We obviously tried to play it up and act like we saw it coming towards us as well, to continue to scare them, but something was all wrong this time. The figure seemed a lot more lifelike, not like a tree swaying in the wind. It didn't feel like an illusion at all. I looked over at my friends and could tell they noticed something was different this time too. It was at that point that I noticed that we were no longer looking at the same shadow figure at the end of the bridge. This one had actually moved directly in front of our car. In a panic, I turned on the headlights because it was becoming a bit too real. Once the lights came on, the figure did not disappear, and it did not stop inching toward our car. There, in front of our car, was a person in an all-black hoodie and all-black pants. Hoodie over his head, looking down at the ground. After the lights came on, he kept inching toward the car at a snail's pace. A prank, I thought. Someone saw us come down and was familiar with the story and wanted to mess with us. We opened our windows and yelled, "Hey, you got us, that was pretty good." He had no reaction. Thinking he was just trying to stay in character, we laughed it off and backed out of the bridge and started heading back up the hill. There was a parking lot up at the top of the hill, still pretty deep into the woods, maybe a minute or two drive from the bridge. We decided to head up that way to gather our thoughts and sort of process everything that had just happened, since adrenaline was still running pretty high. We got to the parking lot, which is normally about a quarter full on a busy weekend during midday with hikers, as it's a pretty popular hiking spot in the area, but 2 a.m. on a Wednesday should have this lot totally empty. Upon pulling in, every spot was full. Considering the park closed at dusk, this was a disturbing discovery. We parked in the middle of the lot, trying to figure out what was going on. I grew up just minutes from this area, and the amount of cars in this lot was probably the equivalent of the nearest town's entire population. We sat in the lot for about 5 to 10 minutes, just talking to each other, trying to figure out what was going on, when 2 German shepherds came running down the hill. They stopped at our car briefly, and then continued running off into the woods. The girl that we had brought with us had a look of horror on her face, and told us that we needed to leave. Confused and still a bit concerned, I agreed and left the area quickly. She put everything together. She said that cult activity in the area around us was very high. German shepherds are commonly an animal they use for sacrifices. I don't know where she got this information, but all I know is that it has been about 5 years. I never saw her again, and I never went back to that bridge at night again.